What's up, y'all? It's Sunday the 14th of March, and I've been wanting to do this for quite a while, but I've been wanting to put together a video of kind of how I build these bows. So I've kind of got some of the steps already taken care of. I've glued up a riser, but what I'm going to do is talk to you and walk you through how I shape every piece from start to finish. These are going to be the core laminations for the bow. I'm going to use some king wood as veneers, and I have a zebra wood and whinge riser glued up that I got to shape and everything. So I'll talk you through or walk you through the majority of the steps. Some of it's been done, but it's pretty simple stuff like cutting out parts, gluing, planing things, gluing them together just to get your big pieces before you start shaping them. So basically this video will be kind of shaping all the parts, getting the parts cut out, laying everything out, the glue up process, gluing on veneers, and then shaping the limbs, shaping the riser, tillering the bow, and officially shooting the bow. So that's kind of what I'm looking to do. Like I said, I got my riser glued up. I'll show you how I cut out my limbs and taper my laminations and get everything stacked correctly so that I get the proper draw length. I'm going to be shooting for about a 47 to 50 pound bow, 65 to 66 inches in length. Sometimes I play with that little half inch on either end just to get my draw weight correct. I don't know, I got a couple guys looking for bows. They really don't know exactly what they want, so they give me an idea whether they want dark riser, light colored riser. So I just build a bow, and then if they like it, they can buy it. Unless somebody tells me exactly what woods they want to use, I just build whatever I think would look good together and make a good shooter, and then cut it loose. So show you around the shop real quick. This is the table I do all my gluing up on, and I actually have a bow already in the form over here I glued up yesterday. This is a bow that I roughed out yesterday. Zebra wood. It's got a mahogany riser. It's a lighter draw weight bow. The stack's not as thick. I don't know exactly what it draws yet. I haven't put string grooves in it yet, but it's a little bit lighter weight because mahogany is not a super hard wood, and I didn't want the riser to mess up on me. But here's my form. It's got a bow in it right now that I glued up yesterday. I'll take it out later today, but basically what I do is the form's 1.5 inches wide. I got some spacers here so that my air hose doesn't push against this and cause a bulge in it. Everything lays flat. And then I just basically have center line marked. I usually work off an 18-inch riser. Sometimes I'll go shorter. These bolts kind of keep everything in the middle of the form. And then of course I just made a little valve stem for my air hose so that I can fill it with air. I usually run about 35 to 40 pounds of air in it. But that's kind of what my form looks like. And then another tool I use a lot is a spindle sander. I really don't use this big plane unless I'm working some big stuff, but I have this 16 to 32 disc planer that I use a ton. That's my most important piece of equipment. I have my forms or my jigs kind of that I lay everything out on. This one is just a straight taper for my veneers. This is for riser blocks and stuff like that. And then this is my taper board, and what I did was I marked I think it was every 4 inches on the back, and then I used tape. I used little slivers of wood to kind of gradually taper this when it was a straight piece of wood, and I layered that on the back in a gradual fashion, and then I ran it through this planer so that it added a taper to it, and then I took those off, and now I have I don't know if you can see it in this video, but I have a very slight taper. It's 0.001 inches per inch. So it's a very slight taper. And then I have this old disc sander, belt sander that I use a good bit. And then I work on this table. I use EA40 epoxy. I use 2 parts A to 1 part B, and that's what I use for my glue up. But I use this for riser. It's a little bit older. The riser's not super important as far as the flexibility of the glue, so it's a little stiffer glue, but it works, the glue riser, so I still use that. But I got some new glue for my limbs and stuff. So I guess we'll get to work here. This is the glass that I use. I forgot to mention that, and also the bandsaw that is another major important factor. But the glass I use is 0.04 bear paw glass, clear glass. I do use some colored glass at times, but 0.04 is what I run. Just because I make lighter weight bows and it's better for clarity seeing the wood underneath. So I always work off an 1.5 inch material because that's how wide my limbs are and how wide my form is to begin with. So my riser actually should be a little bit a little bit thicker than that right now. So I'll have to go over there and plane it down, or take a bandsaw and take a little bit off the edges and then plane it, so it'll fit my form over there. So it's roughed in right now. Usually I make my risers about 2.5, 2.25, 2 inches, 2.5. That's actually 2 1/8 right there. So 2 inches, 2.5, somewhere around there. That'll fit my form, and that's how tall I make them. And then I use 1.5 inch material. I'm at 1 5/8 or just a little over 1 5/8 right there. So we'll have to plane it down a little bit from each side to get it even. But then I have I don't know if you can see it in this video, but there's a whinge stripe in the middle that'll give it some accent. But we're gonna go over there to the planer and get it planed down. Alright, so I just finished planing it to the thickness I need, which is 1.5 inches. Just a heavy 1.5 inches, which will fit my form just fine. And so what I'll do now is, the ends are a little bit rough, so I'll take it over here, square the ends up real good. So you can probably see that whinge beam in the middle a little bit better now. I'm not so worried about this side, because what I'll do is I'll mark center line of this, which I can do right now. So it's 17 3/8. So 8 11/16 should be about right. That'll work. So I got center line there. Alright, so what I'll do is I'll get my form set up. Actually, I have to take the other bow out of the form first, so let's do that. Alright, so what I'll do now is I don't know if you can see that, there's a little pithy looking end to this thing, so I'll make sure that's cut out. So my form that I use to kind of cut out the back side of the fades is this thing. So if I turn it this way, line that up with center, that'll be cut out of my riser. So this good edge, bad edge, we'll cut that out. So I'll make sure that that's the back of the bow. So we'll turn it this way. This is basically the back of the bow here. So I'll line this up with my center line on my form. I'll clamp it on both ends. Kind of an unorthodox way of doing this, but so I like to see a little gap down here. And then what I do is take a little ruler. I just kind of eyeball it first until I close my gap up down here at the bottom. And I measure up from each end. 1 5/8. Just shy of 1.5 inches, so I'll knock this down just a hair. Up on that end. I'm still good at my bottom edge. 1.5 inches. 1.5 inches, perfect. And then I'll just trace it out. My form's not perfect. I built this form 2 years ago when I first started out. It's the only form I've ever built on. So one side it's a little bit off. It's not perfect. So I have my form marked. Top, bottom. So I have to make sure I mark my riser, because if it doesn't go back on the same way, it won't glue up right. So what I'll do now is I'll take this over to the bandsaw and I'll cut out this edge. so for just a rough fit. It's high on both ends, but we got a good bit of sanding to do, so we'll go ahead and get to work on sanding the riser back flats. So when I'm sanding these things, I use 80 grit or 60 grit, because I made the mistake a couple times of trying to sand it too smooth, and my glue joint starved, and my lamination failed. That's the only bow I've had fail on me yet, was because I sanded too smooth. So I got enough of the saw marks out, and I can kind of make a judgment call. Top, always make sure that. I got a high spot right here. I'm looking at light underneath. There's a high spot right here. So I'll mark that with my pencil. And I'll take that off. And I like to, every once in a while, take a little piece of 60 grit, because that thing wants to cup your riser sometimes. So I just take 60 grit and I run right down the middle of it. Kind of seems to me, I don't know if it really does help a ton, but it helps me prevent cupping my riser so that I don't get any. I'd rather have a gap in the middle, a very slight gap, than I would on the edges. Now, getting close. I'm still a little bit high right here. A little bit of high spot right here. The ends I'm not super worried about if they're holding the riser up, because if you think about it, when I taper the ends of it, these ends get pretty flimsy, so they'll lay down in that form real nice, and the middle will touch. So if the middle's up a little bit, as long as it's even up, the ends are going to get more flimsy, so it'll lay down in the riser with pressure. So I'm not concerned about that. Just that high spot right there is going to keep it up. So we're going to work on that high spot, and I'll be back with you shortly. All right, so I got it fit like I wanted to. I'm going to use some 60 now and just kind of rough the whole surface up. I like a good rough surface for glue up. I don't wipe anything down. I just air blow it, blow all the dust off of it, and that's how I get my my material ready for glue up. I don't like to use any acetone or anything. I tried that before, and I don't like to glue up. So I have top and bottom, top, bottom. This riser is a little bit shorter than what I typically make, but I line this up with the back on both sides, midline lined up right there, and then I just trace it out. Everybody wants to build bows, but it's these little pieces like this and figuring out your fades and all that stuff that takes so much time. Once you get it ironed out, it's really not that hard. It's just time consuming, but it's trial and error, especially whenever you start from scratch. So I started the front of my bow at midline, came up an inch and dropped back down 2 inches. So that's where I got my reflex deflex. So I was telling you wrong. But forward of handle, back of the bow, midline, came up about an inch and then dropped back down 2 inches, and that's where I got my original form design. Just kind of thought of it in my head, so I just flipped it around on the board that I made my form out of. But that's just a side note. Let's get back to drawing this thing out, and then we'll go over to the bandsaw and cut it out. And so I save all these pieces. These are the ones that are actually decent, pretty. I use those to make different limb tips and stuff out of. I don't like to waste it. What I typically do is 1 inch in. I like to be about 0.1 thickness, and then 2 inches in I like to be 0.2 thickness. So that's kind of how I like my fades to be. Everything else, that's really the only working part. So outside of that, I don't really care. But then I'll take it over to spindle sander and lay it flat. We'll get everything smoothed out and get my tapers on it. And so I'll just do that to the other side. And then I'll take it over there and measure it. I'll mark 1 inch and 2 inches on both sides. And I just kind of stand it up. And I check it at 1 inch. It's 0.1, perfect. 0.22, that'll work. See if the other side's the same. 0.09, that's close enough. 0.22, so perfect on both sides. So now the riser is done. What I'll do is I can do it right here. I take another piece of 60 grit and I just rough it up real good. So now I have a riser. Let's see what it finished up overall. 17 3/8. You can see the little wind strip in the middle. So now let's get to cutting out some lamination so we can glue this thing up. Piece of this king wood I want to use. I know I have a bad end down here, so I'll probably just work from this end. It's good. So we'll just mark 35. We'll cut it off at 35. Alright, so the stock, the kingwood stock, I know I've already measured it. It's 1.5 inches. Perfect 1.5 inches, so that's fine. The only problem is my maple, which I like to run my grain. Like if I'm cutting my laminations, I want to cut them this way so that my grain's standing vertical. It seems a little bit stronger that way than if the grain's laying horizontal. And this piece will be a little bit more uniform that way. So this is the side I'll work off of. I'll cut my laminations this way. So I need to make sure that I'm 1.5 inches, which I'm not. I'm 1 5/8 inches. So what I'll do is I'll take it over to the planer and I'll knock a little bit off of it. Alright, so I got my 0.04 glass and then whatever my kingwood veneers are going to be in maple. So typically I like to make my maple cores around 0.1. So let's just arbitrarily say, so if my cores are 0.1 maple, so 0.1, 0.1, that's 2 cores, 2 kingwood veneers. Let's go with, let's say 0.05, and then 0.08 total for glass. So that's 10, 18, that's 0.38. 0.38 on my last bow. Let's see, 0.394. That made a 46-pound bow. It's 66 inches. 0.352 made a 40-pound bow. 0.36 made a 47-pound bow. So if we shoot for 0.38 and make a 66-inch bow, 66-inch bow, we're shooting for 47 pounds. Let's say 47. If we can make that total around 0.38, I think we'll make it work. So what we'll do is I got my stock now. My maple is measuring 1.5 inches width. My kingwood is 1.5 inches. A little heavy 1.5 inches, but that's fine. And my riser's cut 1.5 inches. So what I'll do is take this to the bandsaw. I like to start with my veneers because I have to make sure they're pretty. And I gotta cut it pretty thin here because I don't have a whole ton of stock to work with. So we'll take it over to the bandsaw, rip it, at least 4 pieces, and then we'll take it to the planer, plane it down, get it good, get at least one side really smooth and pretty, and then that'll be the back of our bow and the limbs on the front of the bow. And then we will figure out that thickness, write it down, subtract that from our total of 0.38, and figure out what we need to make our cores, because it's easier to work on the cores and get those a little bit thicker since we have more material than it is the kingwood. So we'll take this to the bandsaw and rip it. So what I like to do is measure I like to get it rough where I think the thickness needs to be, and then I'll trim a piece off of a scrap piece and then measure my thickness. We're at 0.08, so that'll give me enough to get my veneers nice and smooth and still keep it within the 0.05, 0.06 range. So I got one rougher edge, it's got some saw marks in it, nothing bad. So I go and mark the X on the side that I don't want to mistakenly put on the back or the front of the bow. Structurally, their wood's fine. All right, and let's see what thickness we came up with here. I think it might be a little thinner than I'd hoped. 0.046, so pretty close to 0.05. That's 0.046 as well. .044, so close enough. So we'll just put 0.045 down as our Kingwood veneer. 05. So we'll just say 0.1 for our maple cores. So same principle with this, but we can run 2 at a time on our tapered form. And so we'll run 2 at a time till we get, this end will obviously be thinner than this end, but once we get at 0.1 back here at the back, then we'll stop. And I like to, my method is I lay them up there a certain way that I remember, so I run them through the same way each time. Don't want to get confused on that. So typically I run 2 runs on one side, flip it over and do the other, and then start alternating. Alright, let's see what we're working with here as far as our thickness goes. We're shooting for 0.1, just slightly over 0.1. I'm at 0.11. So I'm going to make one more pass. I got a little bit of a rough side, so I'll make one more pass on this and then we'll call it good. Alright, so I have all my parts cut out now. I'm going to work on getting my parts laid out like I want them. These little rough ends right here will be covered up, so if I join those together, that'll make a good front of the bow, or back of the bow rather. And then I dig this for the front of the bow, and we'll save this one for laminations later. Alright, so these will go on the back, or front rather. I always get that confused. And then these will be laminations in the middle of the core on the front of the bow. And then what I'll end up having to do is take these, and then what I'll take them over to the belt sander, and I'll grind down the ends of them so that they overlap smooth. And then I'll put some, just regular old super glue, glue them together, hold them down, sand them smooth. That way I'd have a nice even finish and they don't try to separate during the glue up. So I got this little jig set up. I take the thicker end and kind of hold it against this and kind of bevel the ends, and I try to get them both the same so that I can glue them together. So I kind of mock it up, draw a little line to kind of line it up with. Actually, this side could use a little bit taken off. super glue. And I really just eyeball it. I don't really measure anything, and then I just go to the end of the wood. I just eyeball it and hold it. Feel the glue adheres. So now that I got all my parts cut out, other than my glass, what I do is I make a marked center line on both pieces of the back laminations. Line my line up, and I use the thinner piece just because it's easier to bend. And then if I need to make any cuts, I can do so. So that line's where the end of my back laminations are, so I'll cut that. I'm gonna leave the thicker end, so I'll line the butt end up with the place I need to cut, and then I'll trim that on both pieces. So I'll cut about, I don't know, 1 3/4 off. Just make sure I got my laminations the right way. And so I'll need 2 pieces of glass that measure 33.5, and then 1 piece of glass that measures 69 will be fine because I'm making a 66-inch bow. And so what I do is take blue painter's tape and put it on the smooth side of the glass, the side you're not going to glue, just to kind of protect it, and that way when you peel it off you don't have any excess glue that may get stuck on it. So there's 1 piece of glass, rough side. It'll basically go like that, and then I need 2 33.5-inch pieces for the front of the bow, so I'll go in and cut those now. Alright, so I have all the parts laid out. I have my glass, the back of my bow, this side's going to be facing out. I got my X's on the other side, so I know that that's the middle. I got my core lamination, so the riser will actually be here, and then I got this a little backwards, but so then I'll go basically maple core, veneer, and glass again. So we'll basically just blow off all the dust from all the sanding. And so I'm not going to bore you with this process here, but basically what I do is get my form ready for glue up. So I use regular old cling wrap. So like I mentioned earlier, I use EA40 epoxy. And I use 2 parts A to 1, or yes, 2 parts A to 1 part B. And I usually do about about 6 ounces. 4 and 2 usually works pretty good for a bow that I build. So. 6.4 is close enough. So the most important thing is to get your glue stirred thoroughly. Can't have any any bad places in it or it won't work for sure. I like using these clear plastic cups because you can look under the bottom and make sure you got it all. I start with the glass and I go to the first veneer, make sure I got my order. I like to take a step back and look at it before I start. So glass, front side, middle, doesn't matter. And so I glue both sides of each material. So it'll go, we'll start with the glass. I try to use good clean glue. You can salvage it off the paper, but I like to use clean stuff where you're going to see through it. So this takes a little practice, but just a nice thin layer all the way down it. This glass isn't very porous, so it's not going to take as much as the wood. You just want to make sure you cover the whole surface of it. So I've done that side. Now I'll go to the side that you'll actually see through the back of the bow. Alright, just kind of overlook it, make sure you got all the spots. You don't want too much glue because when you put pressure on it, it'll split your lamb if you're not careful. Alright, now I can use the glue that's on the paper because it's not going to be seen. Alright, so you kind of get the point. Then I'll do this one, flip it over, and once I get it flipped over, I won't do the back side until I get the 3 front laminations glued together, and then I will do this strip, set it on the form, and then do the riser, set it on, then the backs of these, and then I'll put them on. Alright, so we got the glue on all sides. There's a method to my madness when I'm taping this thing down. I'll start in the middle, make sure my lines are lined up. I do have them marked. And this is that filament tape from U-Line. It's got the little fibers in them. It needs to be kind of strong tape. Can't just use regular masking tape or anything like that. So that kind of stabilizes the middle, and then I start from the outside parts and work my way in, watching where the line goes so I can move it based on where I tape. So that's going to stay there. Didn't really move my line very much, so. My line still hasn't moved, so I'll go back to the other side again. Kind of keep an eye on your laminations up here too, so they don't slide too far. I got a little room to play, but my line's still straight, so. When you're using this U-Line tape, if you put a little bit too much shear force, especially when it starts to slide down this glass, it cuts it real easy. So I'm not really pulling that hard with the tape as much as I'm pushing down and just trying to get a good snug fit. So I'm about an 1/8, well not really, I'm pretty close to center. We'll get one more right here. And I'll slide my whole form back so I can get access to the very end. And I'll just kind of gradually tape it down. So now what I'll do is take my roll of cellophane and cover it again so that it doesn't stick to my air hose. Alright, so we're back to having top over here. I remember that from when I put the top part of my form on. And so I got these little rubber spacers. I put one in the middle because there's a little pocket there that is always held up by the laminations. I put one right at the end of the fades and one mid fade. And what I do is that allows the air hose enough to go in between them, but these are two critical parts where I want to make sure I get good contact. So just tape them down so they don't slide out. Air hose goes on. Make sure I got the top part of my form, bottom right here, so top's to the left. And then hopefully the bolts line up. That's the reason I set it up first. And these are just basically keep the form from pushing up, so you don't have to really tighten them down too much. Clamp down here. Just kind of make sure that your air hose is over the middle of your bow. It's not trying to ride off either direction. Just make sure both ends are straight. One last look, make sure everything stayed here. Looks good to me. And so when we pump this up, since our veneers are pretty thin, we go pretty slow with our air. I'll put like maybe 10 pounds in it at first just to put pressure on it, start squeezing some glue out. There's 10 pounds. Let the glue slowly come out, that way you don't press it so fast that it splits the lamination or the veneers. 20 pounds. I usually shoot for 40 pounds in them. Seems to be a good number for me. 25. We'll just go slow. 42. So you can see here those rubber bumpers push down, and I still got good contact in here and up here where that's pressing in a critical point there and there. The glue's coming out. My line's a little bit off, but it's not terrible. My hose is in the middle. Alright, so what I'll do now is I'll take it over there. I got a little place I put them to get it out of the way. We'll give it 24 hours. Tomorrow I won't be able to take it out of the form, but I'll give it a little while. It'll probably be Tuesday before I can get it out of the form, but we'll get it out of the form Tuesday. Clean up the excess glue around the sides of it, and we'll get the rough shape in, and then we'll glue some accent strips on the front and the tips. That's the glue up process, from a riser blank, cutting the riser out, to cutting our veneers, tapering veneers, planing them down to the thicknesses we need for our stack in order to make the proper draw length. We're shooting for a 66-inch bow, drawing 47 to 50 pounds, and right now our stack is 0.38 or so, and that should yield us about a 45 to 50 pound bow, somewhere around there. And I can, of course, it'll change a little bit once we start tillering, if somehow the wood, which all the wood was cut from the same two pieces, so it should be pretty similar, both limbs. So we'll see how that goes, but we'll show you the rest of the process once we get everything out of the form, sanded down, rough shaped, accent strips, and then we'll tiller the bow and get her shooting. So looking forward to it. What's up, y'all? It's 2 days after a glue up, so we're gonna take her out of the form today, and we'll get her shaped up a little bit, get her tillered, and hopefully get some laminations or some accent strips put on the front and the limb tips. So it's raining today. Spud will probably be in here most of the day aggravating us, but that'll be all right. So let the air out of the hose, and we'll get the form taken apart. It only really takes about a day for this stuff to cure in room temperature. It's about 70 degrees down here, maybe 65 today. It's pretty chilly, but doesn't take very long. I don't like to really work it the same day I take it out of the form. I let it sit for another day. What you doing, buddy? You got wet hairs, boy. But the reason I started building these bows about two years ago, I decided that I got tired of shooting deer with a compound or hunting deer with a compound. I got to the point where I wouldn't even shoot a deer. I would just watch them. So I kind of got fed up with it. So I needed something to kind of get me back in the game. I shot recurves for a while. I killed a bunch of deer with recurves. And I just never felt that real close tie to it. So I decided to build my own. And I figured out if I built my own, I would stick with it. And that's what I did. I spent all summer shooting, and I had to beat target panic, which was a difficult process. I still battle with it today, but I'm a lot better than I was. I'm able to hold my draw and actually focus on a spot. But so I started building my own bows. First year I built one, I killed a deer with it. I killed two, actually. I did lose a couple deer. Spud helped me track them, and we ended up jumping both of them again. Both of them survived. So I missed several, which is going to happen. But I had a good time. Killed my first deer with my own longbow, which was a really cool experience. Spud was with me to find it. I really didn't need him, but I hit the deer about mid-body, and she only went about 60 yards and fell over. Could have found her without Spud, but it was nice to have him there and my dad there to recover that deer. But I started doing that just because I needed something to tie me back and get me back in the game. So I went elk hunting in Colorado with my own bow. I never got to shoot anything, but it was cool being able just to carry it, knowing it's something you made. And then once I started sharing my stories and stuff, people wanted bows, and I decided, what the heck, I got this shop, which is my grandfather's. I'll come down here and build bows. So I bought some glass, kept using the same form, using some old wood that was in the shop back there. I started building bows, and I built 28 the first year. My dad killed a deer with his, which was cool. Buddy David killed a deer with his. Those are the only two that I know of that were successful. And last year I killed 4 with my longbow. So what I got is a bow that's got a bunch of garbage looking on it, but we'll peel the tape off, peel the cellophane off. So Spud's my tracking dog. I know a lot of y'all who are going to watch this video know who Spud is, because he's either tracked a deer for you or you read a story about him. He's a good dude. He probably looks at me every time I build another longbow like, I'm going to have to go to work now if I'm not going to shoot one in the gut. But it's part of the game. And people always talk about the longbow being unethical and all this stuff. The only unethical part is if you don't practice with it. And if you do shoot a deer marginally, which can happen with any equipment, the only unethical thing is if you don't do everything you can to recover it. To me, that's unethical. If you practice and you shoot the bow efficiently, shoot it accurately, and you take shots that are within your limits, there's nothing unethical about that. Bad shots happen, and I can't stand when people say, well, I've never lost a deer. I've never had a deer run. They always drop in their tracks. It just bugs the crap out of me because one, you've either not shot a lot of deer, or two, you're bold-faced lying. So it's part of deer hunting. Been tracking deer with a dog for 22 years, and I've seen a bunch of stuff. I've seen deer hit really well that go 600 yards. Had a deer last year, as a matter of fact. It was shot with a rifle through the ribs with a 308, and we ended up shooting her again 7 hours later. Spud bait her, and I got a video of that bullet hole entry and exit right through the middle of the ribs. Deer was alive 7 hours later. So they're crazy animals. Anything can happen. So people that say they've never lost a deer are usually lying to you. So what I do is just clamp it down. This is, it may not seem like much, you're not using power tools, but these are imperative when you're doing this, because these little pieces of glue chip away real easy and they fly everywhere. They seem to pop off pretty quick. So I just take this plane and break off the excess and just plane it down. Get the excess glue off of it. Alright, but you get the point, just a regular old hand plane. I'm going to take the glue off both sides, and then I'll take it over to the disc sander, and I'll just straighten up the edges of the riser. I'll go back to flush with the riser, get my laminations flush with it, and get the glue cleaned up on the edge. That way I can draw straight lines and I can have a basis to work and measure my limb widths and all that stuff off of. So now that I got the sides fairly cleaned up, I'll take this disc sander and I'll plane this or sand this down so it's flush with the riser. Alright, so I got it pretty smoothed up. I got some glue right here still left, but for the most part it's pretty smooth. What I'll do now is make sure this is flush, and I do that so whenever I have to clamp it to the table and put my accent on the back of it, that it's kind of flush and don't want to rock on the table. Hey, lay down. Just lay down. So I inadvertently took the line off that was center line of my riser, so I have to remeasure that. So I go to the very tip of the fade. I'm 17 and a quarter, so 8 and a half, 8 and 5/8 should be about right. Mark center line right there. So what I'll do is put it in the vise, and I have a template that I use for clamp. So this template, the base of it lines up down here. It's kind of a feel thing. I don't really measure it anymore. It's more of a feel. I make sure my sides are lined up. This is 1.5 inches, just like my bow thickness, or width rather. Then I clamp it. And if I feel good about that, then I'll look down here at the end and then just kind of line it up in the middle. I may rotate it slightly, just so it kind of falls in the middle. It's not like forced one way or the other. And I just trust it. I've done it enough to trust that line. So I just clamp them down. So now that it's clamped, because of course my limb thickness is going to change. The laminations may shift slightly, so the lamination you're seeing on top of the glass may not be exactly straight. So basically I look at the main thing I look at is if everything's straight down here, I try to get it center in the middle. And then I'm going to make this bow about 66 inches long. So there's my 66-inch mark. So I'll cut the bow about 67 and a quarter, and that's where I make my mark. And then what I'll do is take my Stanley knife, and that's the reason I keep the blue painter's tape on there, because whenever I score it, I really don't have to score the glass as much as just cut the tape, and then I can peel the tape away and follow my line. And then I just flip the clamps around while I'm holding it. Don't make sure I don't let it move. Alright, so that's how one side's done. There's my limbs are going to be shaped out to be. Then I'll flip it around and do the other side. I won't show you that. You've already seen it. Alright, so I just use this saw to cut my mark. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but I make sure I cut on the other side of the line, and I'll cut the limbs to length. Alright, so what I'll do now is I'm going to end up having to replace these discs. I won't bore you with watching this, but what I'll do, I'll make sure this is 90 degrees. That's important because you want to lay it flat. And that's one reason you keep tape on it, so it doesn't scar the glass on this, even though it's smooth, it will scratch your glass. So want to lay it flat, and then I'll work it in to that line, and then I'll peel the tape once I get the edge of the rough edge off, and then I'll peel the tape and I'll work to that line and do it on all 4 sides. And then once I do that, then the bow will be pretty close to tillered. It's crazy how close it will get. And then we'll take it over there and sand some limb tips in it, some grooves, and we will string it up and see where we're at tiller wise. But for right now, I'm gonna go ahead and start sanding on this. Alright, so we just got done rough sanding the edges, getting them kind of the shape. So what I like to do is just take a piece of sandpaper and kind of knock down the high, well, not really high points, but just kind of clean it up a little bit. So now the fun begins. We get to draw it after we get some string grooves cut in, of course, but tiller it, get it. I tiller most of my bows even. They're long and they're pretty forgiving. You can usually tune out any knock high, knock low with the knocking point tuned even, whether you shoot 3 under or split, which is what I found. I found that most of my bows tuned even shoot pretty well 3 under, and that's what most people do. So what I do now is I've already got my center line here. I got to transfer it back to the back here, which I didn't do earlier. This is always a fun part. Seeing what's underneath the glass. Remember, we put kingwood on it. Like it always starts to tear right there. But she looks pretty. And listening to Parker McCullum on Pandora makes me wish I was back in Colorado. Seemed to be that was what played every time I was out there. It's all it played. Be riding around the mountains listening to Parker McCullum. I wish I was back out there, and I'll go back. I wasn't successful last year. I got on bulls the first day, and they ended up disappearing on me, and I hunted hard for 18 straight days, or 18 days total. I was in the backcountry 9 days to begin with. Then I went back in 3 and 4 day stints after that. Just couldn't get on them, but it was a lot of fun. All right, so basically what we do now is we got all the tape off. Try to show this appropriately. There's a line, midline of the riser. This butts up again. This form actually, this jig actually holds 2 purposes or performs 2 functions. Clamp it in the middle, clamp it back here, make sure the edges line up, and then I really just need one other clamp to fold it to the end. Clamp it at the end. Making a 66-inch bow, so where the 66-inch mark is, I just make a mark on the front of the bow. Okay, and these little holes I will use to tiller, so I just take my pencil and mark them. They're every 4 inches on the little form. And so that side is almost done. I don't know why I haven't drilled a 4th or another hole, but I failed to do so. So after the last hole, I make another one at 4 inches. Try to do the same thing on both limbs. So right now we don't have any limb tips glued on. So basically all we're going to do is make little notches on the side. I got this Japanese file from Woodcraft. I use this one predominantly. It's old and worn out, but it still cuts. So where that mark is at 66, I'll go just in front of it And it's a feel thing more than anything. I kind of know what angle I need to put it on based on how it lays in the vise every time. But you don't want it too abrupt, because then you'll have a sharp angle where the string comes out of the string groove, and you don't want it too flat because it has difficulty staying in. So right now, we just want to make string grooves deep enough to hold a string so we can get tillered. I'll kind of fold them over just a little bit here on the edge, just so the string doesn't get cut. Mark the center, eyeball at center. That's where I need to pop out with the top groove. And then I'll do the same on the bottom side. There's probably a lot of ways to do this. I'm probably not doing it the most efficient way. But I know the center of my file needs to come out on that top hole, and the bottom needs to come out on the top side of the other hole. And before I get too far gone, I just kind of fold them over and look at it from both sides, make sure it's going to come out all right. This looks pretty good to me. That looks really good up there. Pretty good on the bottom. So we'll just kind of cut this one straight in like we did the other one. All right, so all I do now is I flip it over. Just kind of clean up the back side. These really don't matter because you're not adding anything, so you can kind of go in and get your direction with these. And then I got some old strings laying around, kind of like what I make, and I just check it to make sure it's actually going to hold when we string it up, which that feels like it's going to hold okay. So we'll leave it like that, and then we'll do the other one, and then I'll be back with you in a second. All right, let's see what we got. Watch out, boy. I can already see now one limb's a little bit stiffer than the other. This limb's definitely stiffer, but I could, I'm gonna take a little bit out of that string. Let's try this again. So I'll lengthen the string a good bit. All right, I'm good with that. Let's get to tillering it. So this is my method of tillering the bow. I don't know how everybody else does it, but this makes shooters for me, so I don't really worry about it, what others do too much. I draw a midline, so it don't matter which side. If I happen to flip them up, it don't matter. I just compare them each time. So I draw dots that represent each dot I've drawn on the limb. And then for each one of these dots, I basically measure perpendicular to the string. So that's 6 3/8, 5 11/16, 4 3/4. We'll say 3 1/2. It's a heavy 3 1/2, but it's close enough. I know we're gonna have to do a bunch of work to it. I missed this one a little bit. 2 1/16. All right, let's compare them. 6 1/8. So we're only a 1/4 inch off right there, which is a lot. 5 1/2, 4 1/2, 3 7/16. 2 1/16. So the limb tips are the same. Let's double check that, because that's kind of odd to me. 2 1/16, 2 1/16, so 3 1/16, 3 1/2. So the ends of the limbs are pretty close. There's a stiff spot in here apparently. 4 1/2, 4 3/4. So the bend is in here. This needs to bend more. So I just kind of make a mark just so I'll remember. So our main issue is right in here somewhere. So we're gonna take it off, take the string off, and we'll sand that. Do the same process again. 6 11/16. So we're looking at a pretty tillered bow right now. Let's see what we're draw weight wise. 46 1/2 pounds, so pretty close. So what I'll do is I'll sand the limbs, recheck tiller. What I mean by sanding, I'll use a sanded block and square up the edges, get all the high points out. I kind of eyeball down the edge, make sure that my string is tracking center, which it looks pretty good. I'll show you guys that. Smooth drawing. So what I'm gonna do is I'll lay it flat, sand all the edges up, get them nice and smooth, recheck tiller. I'll probably lose another maybe half a pound, and then we'll get another string on it again, check it again. All right, it's time to put some accents on it. We got it tillered. I just re-tillered it after I sanded the edges, the limb edges smooth. She actually came in tighter that time than when I first tillered it, so it's perfect. I mean, it's drawing 46 pounds, and it's tillered pretty much dead even. And so what I'll do is we'll mark center line, middle here. And like I said, I'm about to put some accents on it, and this is just my method of doing so. I measure my accents on the front are 11 inches total, so I measure 5.5. Just kind of make a rough line across, and then I take some really rough sandpaper, some 60 grit or 80 grit, something like that, and then I just score it, scratch the glass up really good there so we can get a good glue surface. All the excess glue that's on the edges, I clean it up, get it real smooth on the edges and scratch up the surface. And typically the wood that I use, I mean, it really doesn't matter as long as it matches the bow or appeals to you. But what I typically do is whatever the veneers are, that's the accent I have on the far back side. And then I usually use what's in the core of the limbs or what's in the riser as the first layers. I put 2 layers of accent on this. 2 pieces. I'm gonna use maple and kingwood for this front accent piece. So I'll have a piece of maple plain down, I don't know, roughly 0.1, 0.12, somewhere around there. And then I'll have my kingwood on top of that, and I'll make them both 11 inches. I'll glue them just like I did the veneers and core laminations, and I'll just adhere it to this. My limb tips, let me go find a piece of material for that. So these are my scrap buckets down here. I have there's some winch right there I could probably get a piece out of. I have a hard time throwing stuff away. So I have a piece of kingwood here that I'd already cleaned up to put on the bow. So I'll just use a piece of this. It's already planed down, so I'll use that as well as a piece of maple. And I had, here it is, a piece of maple already planed down. So basically all I'll have to do now is I don't have to plane anything. I'll just cut 2 11-inch pieces out of this, and we'll use this. Alright, so that'll serve that purpose. Now I gotta find me some winch. I can probably get a piece out of that. We cut it there. And we'll go back here. We still have a piece that's 5/8 to there. That's total 3.5. That'll be plenty. So if I cut that out, trim that down, I'll be able to get a piece out of it. And so what I'll do now is I'll cut whatever width I need out of this. I think I said, I usually go about 2 inches down. I got my piece here. I can always, that white will be trimmed off, or I can actually probably get 2 pieces out of it without worrying about it. So let's go 1 3/4. So make a mark at 1 3/4, and down here I make a mark at 1 3/4. So let's cut us 2 3/4 pieces. All right, if you look, this doesn't sit flush. You got a little bend in the limb tip right there. So what I'll do is I typically take just heavy sandpaper on the edge of this table, and I sand the corners down so it sits pretty flush, and then I take it over to the belt sander and taper the end down to the limb, and then I may thin it a little bit. That's a pretty thick piece. So I start by just sanding it flat, and then kind of lift up on one end, lift up on the other end, run across the middle, lift up. We're getting there. Hey boy, where you been? Been playing? It quit raining on you? Alright, go run along. Go run along, I'm doing work. Alright, that lays pretty good. So I take that down to a finite point. That way when it lays down, I got a good point here. That'll sit nice in my limb. And then that fits pretty good. So we'll keep it lined up with the one we want it to be on. Make sure this goes with this limb tip. They're not much different, but since we fit it specifically for that one, we'll leave them on that end. And we'll all right, so we're gonna glue the laminations, or the accents. I keep calling them laminations, but the accents for the front of the bow or the back of the bow in the limb tips. So I sanded them down, the glass that I'm gonna glue to. So I roughed it up so it'll get good glue contact. I got my pieces cut out and shaped. I got the point to them. That way whenever I lay them down, it'll be a nice even point. I don't have to do as much sanding. So I blow these pieces off too. Get all the dust off of them. It don't take a whole lot on this glass, so put a layer. I kind of see where I've been with my sandpaper, so I'll go right to the edge of that, so I don't have to sand as much excess off if I do go past. One thing I forgot to do, and I'll do it before I start, is to find center line on your two pieces here. So we're 5.5. Make sure they're even. Line up my lines. Ahead of myself. So I put this on so it'll kind of help spread out the load. Just throw a couple more clamps on it. So make sure it's good left and right, flush on the ends. Gotta push that one down a hair. But basically we got everything glued up. Limb tips are on, accents are on. Next time you see me on this bow, we'll be taking all this off, sanding it back smooth, getting our limb tips cut again. We'll use the same grooves we used to begin with the tiller of the bow. We'll get those cut back in, put a string on it, recheck tiller, cut a grip in it, and we'll probably have it shooting the next time you see it. Good morning, y'all. It's our third day working on this bow. We're gonna take the the clamps off so we can see the accents this morning, and we'll get her shaped up today. Hopefully we'll have a shelf cut in it and be able to shoot it today. I got to go to work here in a little bit, but hopefully we got enough time to get her roughed in and maybe put a string on it, maybe fire an arrow or two. It's a little early. I'm over here at my grandfather's wood shop, and I don't like to start the machines up super early, but somebody just came in. It's 8:20 in the morning. Trying to be a little courteous anyway. Alright, so y'all kind of seen this before. I got my rough shape. I'll just kind of hand sand it now, make sure the transition is nice and smooth. Get my basic shape to my limb tip how I want it smoothed out, so whenever I cut my groove, really all I have to do is do a light sanding and clean it up. So basically I just take the same file and I follow that same string groove that I had cut earlier. I just have to bring it on up through the wood. back down to the other side. So you get the point. I'll cut those back in once I get it nice and sanded, and then we'll go from there. All right, so we got one limb tip cut in. Time to lay the bow out. The fun part, getting it to where we can shoot it. I've got the limb tips sanded in the way I want them. I've cleaned up the front a little bit, got the fades on the accents cleaned up. I'm just gonna make sure that my line is still center line. I'm at 8 11/16 there. 8 11/16 there, so good. So we'll just make sure our lines are nice and visible. All right, so we're making a right-handed bow. So we want the shelf obviously to be cut on the left. The only two things that really dictate which direction I go with the shelf is, one, if I'm making a stiffer bottom limb for a specific shooter, or if I am, hey buddy, if I'm making a bottom stiffer limb, then obviously the limb has to go to the bottom and the shelf has to be cut to one side. The only other thing that I'll do is if I look down the bow and it just is slightly off center at the riser, it's very rare that it happens. But if the string tends to track to one side more than the other, I'll make that the shelf on that side. But this one's pretty much dead nuts, tillered perfect, and then the string tracks perfectly midline. So we'll just pick a random side. I also look at the grain of the wood to see what would be prettiest, but this is pretty straightforward. I go about 7/8 above center line for my shelf. Heavy 7/8. Heavy 7/8, so good. So there's that's where our shelf's going to be cut in. Usually the throat of the grip, I measure from the back of the back of the back glass, and I go about an inch and 3/8 to an inch and a half. I make a mark, and I hand draw just kind of the shape that I want. So the main measurement is this one right here in the middle, because that's how thick I want the throat of my grip to be. And then I just kind of eyeball it on down for my grip. So I don't know if y'all can see that okay. That's the main measurement. This is 7/8 above center line. That's where basically the throat of your grip's going to be, where your handles sit. You'll have a radius shelf up here to shoot off of, and then this is kind of the rough shape of the riser. So the grip. My bows aren't cut center shot, but it's an inch and a half wide, so 3/4 would be half. I go just shy of half, so I go about 9/16 to 5/8, so just somewhere right in there, 9/16 to 5/8. I make a mark. I do the same back here, even though it's kind of hard to see where I've cut. I go and cut my shelf in. I cut it down to those lines that I made. Right. And then for the inside window, I really eyeball this as well. So I start from that line that I just marked. I'm gonna have to go a little bit further with my cut, but I just use a ruler and kind of gradually pull it. And I know that my accents on the front are 11 inches. So I just kind of use that as a guide as where I want to finish up this blade. All right, the only other thing I do is I make a little divot in here. All right, so now what we do is we kind of radius our shelf. I really eyeball it. I like for the high point to be kind of closer to the back or the front of the bow. Then I'll do my inside radiuses. And I just take a file, a rough file, square it up a little bit. Alright, so technically if you wanted to go shoot it right now, you could. The grip's not very comfortable, but she's shootable. Pretty excited about it. Now all we have to do, it's kind of tedious, we take it over to the spindle sander and we get our grip shaped. Alright, to start out with the spindle sander, I usually use an 1 to 1.5 inch spindle sleeve, and I start by going throw to the grip. So I want to make it narrow and as deep as I want to before I start with any bigger things and start hogging some wood. But basically just kind of make a throat to the grip where I want it, with the shelf being about 7/8 to 1 inch high. And then once I get that done, then I can start hogging some stuff with some bigger discs. Alrighty, so we got the handle rough shaped. So now, basically the only thing we got to do now is final sanding. So we're to the point now where we got it where we want it roughly. And we just got to clean it up, get it smooth around the corners. And we'll spend it probably takes, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour to really get one sanded the way you want it. I don't use any power tool sanding, I will do it all by hand. Hey buddy, give me shakies. What's up, buddy? You wanna go play? We'll go run around in one day. Dirty busy right now. Dirty busy, I know. Give me kisses in the earball. So I just kind of, in a methodical fashion, I take 60, 80, 120, 150, and then 220 to finish it up. I get the 220, and I just kind of lightly clean up the corners of the limbs, get any excess glue that's on there off. That's real light sanding, real light. Basically just clean up the limbs on the side you're working on. We'll flip it over a couple times. For any flaws, you kind of just glance over and make sure you're getting all the spots while you're working. But you get the point. A lot of sanding. Like I said, we'll go 60, 80, 120, 150. Get all the curves rounded off, smooth. All the saw marks, spindle sander marks. So now we have a bow. Excuse me. I pretty pleased with it. Pretty comfortable grip. Feels good in the hand. £45. So we were shooting for 45 to 50. We came out on the light end, but I'm tickled. It's gonna be a sweet shooting bow. Well, that pretty much concludes the building aspect of things. Now all we have to do is sign the name, put the draw weight on it, and shoot it a couple times. After we do that, we'll get the clear coat on it, and she'll be ready to go home to whoever's gonna give her a home. All right, so we're back with you. Spoke with a couple guys and actually found someone who wants this bow. She's been tillered, she's shaped, everything's good. I just got to do some final sanding, but I like to shoot them a few times before I go back and recheck tiller once more. I'll probably shoot them 15 to 20 times just to kind of break them in a little bit, and then go recheck tiller, make sure nothing's changed, and then recheck the draw weight, and I'll be able to label the bow appropriately. But Evan Fulmer's going to take the bow. I'm excited for him, but I'm going to shoot a couple arrows through it. I just basically start out with about a 6 3/4 inch brace height from the throat of the grip to the string, and this bow is right around 43 to 44 pounds is what I know for sure right now. And a Heritage 90 cut full length with 145 up front should probably shoot pretty good in it. My knocking point, I typically go just about 3/8 above the shelf, and I just recently switched to shooting 3 under, so I don't shoot split finger anymore. And basically 3 under tends to work a little bit better for my even tiller bow. So I'm gonna step back here and shoot a few arrows and see what we're working with. So actually, this arrow is shooting really well as far as knock left, knock right. Like I said, it's a full length Heritage 90, and I'm shooting it. I think they discontinued these arrows, by the way, so if you're gonna get them while you still can. But it's actually shooting a little bit knock low, which is kind of unusual, I guess, because I switched to 3 under. But a little bit knock low, but it's ever so slightly weak. So I could probably take a 1/2 inch off of this shaft, shoot a 145 grain point, and shoot it just fine. It's probably going 165, 170 feet a second right now. So what I'll do is I'll take it back over to the wood shop. We'll do a final sanding on it, and then recheck the draw weight, label it up, and we'll start putting a coat of clear on it. So she's 43.8 pounds and 28 inches. I'm gonna draw it to 29. 45.8 at 29. And 49 at 30 inches. So a pretty smooth drawn bow. It doesn't really stack that bad. So what we're gonna do now is final sand it, get it cleaned up real good. We'll sign Evan's name to the bow, and go put a coat of clear on it. So what I use to finish these bows is just regular protective automotive clear coat. It works well. I tried some urethane, spar urethane. It's hard to get it even on the edges. Like if you do the riser with spar urethane and then try to use a spray finish, you can see the edge. So now what I do is I just spray it all with a protective clear coat finish, automotive stuff. So it works good. I've finished probably 30 bows with it. She turned out good.
Yeah, she did. And that's really
there's a splice right there. So the beam in the middle is actually a splice piece of winch, but and then zebra wood with.
Incredible, man, incredible.
I hope you hunt with a longbow much.
No, man. I don't, like I was talking to you. I shot a longbow when I was a young teenager.
Yeah.
And that's the only bow I've ever shot. It's just that, you know, I want to get back into it.
Yeah. If you call Drew at Sailway.
Yeah.
Drew's a good friend of mine. Just tell him that you've got one of my bows.
Yeah.
And he'll be able to quiver as well. That limb's wide enough for what they call the hybrid quiver.
Yeah. Like when you handed it to me, I was like, hold on. What? No.
Yeah.
The dang arrow weighs more than the dang bow, man.
I shoot those bows 3 under, so some people shoot split. It'll tune okay split, but you'll find that your knock point has to be pretty high.
Yeah.
I just switched. I've been shooting a longbow recurve for about 15 years, and I switched to shooting 3 under, literally 2 months ago.
Really?
And you can take those bows, like the 44-pound bow shooting 500 grain arrow, and you can be point on with a little bit of string walking, like we're talking a ½ inch of string walk. You can shoot point on out to 33, 35 yards with your draw in. I mean, man, I built 40 bows now, 45 bows, something like that.
Really?
Yeah, and I've shot them all split finger. Every time I make one, I shoot it split. And I always have trouble getting a little knock out of it. So I said, you know what, I'm going to start shooting 300. And I did, and it was darts. And I mean, of course, it's the way I shoot the bow, but I find it's a lot easier to tune 300. About 6.5 to 6 3/4 when I put the brace height.
Okay.
All right. And then I forget the length of that string. If you need a string, just holler at me. I'll make you one.
Okay.
Well, I'm gonna put that video together and I'll give it to you. It'll be it's about an 1.5 hours long, start to finish, of taking that bow from a riser block, blocks of wood, to that finished product.
That's awesome.
And hopefully it'll get seen quite a bit.
I'm amazed with it. Now, I'm gonna make some videos and obviously take some pictures.
Yeah.
Because I plan on, you know, putting it to its best potential. That's for sure.